Welcome to the Big Book Club. I'm Damian Barr, and tonight's show comes to you from Lanark Memorial Hall. Our theme is nature, not naturism. That's another show. During lockdown, many of us turned to nature for escape. From the birds in our back gardens or on our windowsills to the trees and stars framing our very own patch of sky, we've sought comfort and perspective in the natural world. Tonight, we'll go hill walking and wild swimming. We'll visit faraway islands and wander deep, deep into the woods. My guests are Luke Turner, Amanda Thomson, Kathleen Jamie, and we'll have poetry from Heather H. Young. I'll also visit a very blustery Edinburgh to meet the Grassmarket Open Book Group. Now, if you go down to the woods today, you're in for a big surprise, especially if those woods are Epping Forest and you happen to run into our first guest. His pioneering memoir details his joys and struggles with faith and sexuality, nature and nurture, the city and the forest. He's here tonight to take us all out of the woods. It's Luke Turner. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here.
Nice to be here.
So before we chat, let's have a wee reading from the book.
OK, this is a passage from the start of Out of the Woods, about sort of what the forest looks like. For me, the forest was becoming a place of vulgar chaos. In half light, the misshapen forms of the trees within the forest seemed to be moving, boiling up out of the ground like lava. The trees of Epping Forest have a fantastical appearance thanks to centuries of pollarding, the process of forest management whereby they're cut on a regular basis for firewood or building materials. Once cut, the tree sends up new growth from an increasingly distorted trunk or bole. Pollarding prolongs a tree's life, but the continuous cutting makes them take on grotesque forms. Cow's udders, a pair of buttocks climbing into a hollow, old men's balls, a phallus between thighs, great, heavy, warty growths. I stumbled on one that was the spitting image of Bart's bottle-sucking baby sister Maggie from The Simpsons. Alone as I was in the heart of the darkening wood, the deformed shapes added to my disconcerting awareness that as I was surrounded by thousands of living beings, connected by the invisible network of mycelium fungi through which they communicate, send warnings, and share nutrients. I felt as if the forest ought to hum, to be whispering around me, to sound alive. But I'd stare at the trees up close and become lost in the whole magical, gigantic organism, silent aside from the sigh of the wind through a billion bare winter twigs. Mute to the human ear it might be, but as my walks increased in frequency, my internal conversation with the forest ebbed and flowed from a whisper in a silent glade to a rage in the heart of a storm. There you go.
Thank you very much. I wanted to read your book for ages, and in my head it was filed under sexy tree book, which is you know, those two words don't often go together, and I want to talk more about that in a minute. But first of all, tell me how Epping Forest came into your life.
Basically, it's where my family are from. Both my parents grew up right near the forest. My granny, when we go and visit her, we'd have to drive through the forest to get to it. My uncle and auntie still live opposite the forest. So it's always been there in my life. And as sort of London getting more and more expensive, I kept moving towards the forest, and I sort of tried to reconnect to it, and tried to sort of get back into that mindset, I think, of innocence, I suppose. But it's a very long connection with our family. We had a rumour that one of our ancestors was sort of conceived in the forest as part of an affair between an aristocrat and his servant, and part of the book was trying to uncover that story. And I think it was looking for that connection to the woodland, basically.
So, as a child, did you go for holidays there? Did you play there? Was it a place of play, a place of refuge? Was it scary?
I grew up in a small town. There was just a very arable sort of agro business around it. So going around the M25 and then coming off the motorway into the forest with all the light shining through the trees, and particularly these pollarded trees, just looked amazing. And yeah, we'd go a lot. You know, my Uncle Barry would take me over and he'd teach me what the trees were, and we'd carry wood back for the fire. And, you know, we'd visit a lot, and it was just this, you know, it's not like anywhere else. So it did have a big impact on me from a very early age.
So you say in the book that for your parents, the forest was evidence of God's creation, and you grew up in a very religious household where, you know, God was practically a third parent, I think you say at one point in the book. Tell me what kind of faith you grew up in and how that connected with the florist.
It was Methodist Church, and for those who aren't aware of it, it was a very working class movement from the 18th century. Was very involved in organisations like the start of the Labour Party and CND, and have the best hymns as well. So it was great. I loved growing up in the church. There was a huge community, very ethnically mixed. People of all backgrounds. And there was a nature connection in that for a while I lived in West Yorkshire, and we do these church walks every weekend, 5 miles of the Pennine Way. And that was one of the first sort of really intense connections with nature, or the natural world I remember having, is just being out on the Yorkshire moors, and I remember once hiding under a rock with all the church people, and there's a big thunderstorm, and it was really exciting. So religion and church were always very, very connected for me.
Mm-hmm. And was that easy at school?
No, I mean, it's quite odd, really, isn't it? About the weirdest thing you can be is from a religious family when you're at school, particularly as a teenager. But my dad was a Methodist preacher, and he did the service in St Albans Cathedral for the church. It wasn't a posh school, it was a normal school, but we had an annual service in St Albans Cathedral, and he did the sermon. I was very proud of him, always have been. But people do sort of pick on you for that sort of thing. It's quite odd. It really marks you out as a bit of an outsider and a bit weird. Yeah, it was strange.
Somewhere around your teens, you started to question your sexuality or realise that you became out of step with the other boys around you. And I wonder how that sat alongside that religious upbringing.
I mean, that was the really complicated time, because not only are you're sort of confused about sexuality and thinking, am I, back then, fluid sexuality wasn't quite as prominent as it is now, and thinking, well, maybe I'm actually gay because I have these attractions to other men, and then I knew religion was strict on that, and there was not so much from my immediate family or anything like that, but from the wider church, you see these homophobic teachings. But it was also, and probably I think the more negative thing was the secondary school being in an all-boys state school in a town that was weirdly rough, even though it was just outside London.
St Albans.
St Albans, yeah. And it was a very macho atmosphere. It was the 90s, which I think is one of the worst decades ever. It was culturally moribund, and was a very that was a whole lad culture time. And there was a lot of bullying at school, and there was no conversations about sexuality. People might be aware of Section 28, the Tory ruling. You couldn't promote homosexuality in schools, so you didn't learn about sexuality. There were no icons in culture, really. So that the sort of societal pressure, and then the religion aspect, and the sort of ideas of sex being shameful and so on, did make things very difficult. Yeah.
For me, it's really interesting. I think for a lot of people who think of nature writing, they wouldn't necessarily think that you deal so much with human nature. But I personally think that's fascinating, and I think it's really important, because I think so often nature writing has this reputation for being rarefied and separate from the human world, and I think that you do a brilliant job of putting people right back into it.
Yeah, I mean, thank you, because that's something I was really interested in writing about. It's one of these strange things with Out of the Woods, that all these different threads that came together in a way that I wasn't necessarily expecting, because it started off as this history book about forest, and then definitely isn't now.
Is that how it started? A history book about the forest?
I wanted to write. I felt there hadn't been one since the 50s, and they were very sort of stuffy, patrician sort of nature books. And I thought, what about one that it takes it up to date and actually looks at the chaotic influence that people have had on the forest? And yeah, I really was frustrated by that idea of the lone enraptured male, as it was brilliantly termed, of nature writing, striding forth and discovering things, and being knowing all the names of the plants and that. And I was like, well, what else goes on there? Particularly for bisexual men, woodlands are often the only place they can find partners, because they can't be out in the gay scene or whatever. And
why is that?
Well, I think there's a lot of... For me, I've always been very open about having a fluid sexuality, but I don't know many men who have. I've met a lot of men over the years who are bisexual and in the closet. And woodlands, cruising areas and so on, that's when you find the people who are in the closet, whether that's because they're in a you know, they've never been able to sort of come out, so they've ended up being in a heterosexual relationship that they're sort of cheating on, I suppose. Or they're from cultures or religious groups who are very homophobic, so they end up in these secret spaces. And the whole of nature, all it is sex and death. That's all, and murder. You know, that is all nature is. It's just a constant churning cycle of reproduction. And I find that very ominous, but very beautiful. And sex is such a part of that. But yeah, I read a lot of nature writing. And apart from Derek Jarman, my sort of hero, really, there's no sexuality in it, by and large.
Yeah, I think that's quite true. There's a scene where you describe going into the forest at night, and I was terrified reading it in the book, because, I mean, I just thought, I cannot imagine ever feeling brave enough to just, you know, totter off into the woods in the darkness and just see what's there. What drove you to do that?
I wasn't very happy at that time in my life, to be honest. I didn't know what was... I was a real mess, and I think I was sort of setting myself a challenge. You know, I'm a man. I should be able to do this confidently. This is my privilege as a man, white man, to be able to walk through the woods. Maybe this will make me feel better. I'll be able to feel a sense of confidence. And I tried this sort of, you know, dusk walk into the forest, and it was genuinely one of the most unnerving experiences of my life. But there were other people in the forest that evening, as I write about in that passage in the book, who were having a lovely time. And then you realise it's not the forest is terrifying necessarily, it's yourself, it's what you've taken in with you. And when you're in that space, everything is going to be triggered and set off. You know, I don't know whether I did, the vision I had on that walk, which, you know, I won't spoil it for future readers, whether I saw that, what it was something about myself? Had I seen myself in a kind of waking nightmare? But I know I ran out of the forest as fast as I could, kind of shivering and sweating, and it was absolutely, absolutely terrifying.
You come to a conclusion that we won't give away we won't spoil what you find out or not about your family, but you confront this idea that nature is there as a resource for us, as a neutral place where we can go and take what we need, really, kind of cure ourselves. And you talk about, is it Shirin-yoku, the idea
forest
of forest bathing?
Yeah.
So you know, it's not like you're discouraging people from going and enjoying nature. You're just sort of saying, well, that's not all it's for.
Yeah, I think I get really into the people using the forest. I love seeing people in there, but I mean, it seems to be like every single week now there's a broadsheet article about nature cures, forest bathing, all of these things, and it became for me when I think I was probably going to look for those things in the woods, and it wasn't happening. I was having hallucinatory panic attacks when I went into the woods, and in the daytime it often felt really oppressive and dank and nasty. And I think there's a bit of a dodgy binary where it's sort of go into nature, it will make you feel better. And surely that's as you know, you're trying to extract from the landscape in the same way as forestry does, or so on. It's this very human-centric idea that nature is there to make us feel better, not that we are part of nature and we are complicated as nature is too. So I think that was something I was definitely trying to critique a little bit, saying, you know, nature is complicated. It isn't there to make you feel better. And if you go into nature wanting to feel better and expecting it to make you feel better and you feel terrible, then you're going to feel worse about yourself. So it's called the tyranny of should, it's called. It's an actual psychological condition.
The tyranny of should.
Yeah, something should make you feel better, like your forest bathing, and it doesn't, then that's going to have a negative impact upon yourself and your mental health.
You mentioned binaries earlier, and this is a book that really, where you're caught between a lot of binaries, this desire to be yourself, to lose yourself in the city, to go to the forest, to lose yourself, to be with men, to be with women, to be of God, to be of the secular world. And many of the tensions seem irreconcilable. How does the forest function in your life now with regards to some of those tensions?
I think it's been a case of saying these binaries don't have to be binaries, and you can be happy in the chaos and the turmoil, and it's acceptance.
Or acceptance or rejection of the binaries?
Maybe rejection of the binaries.
Yeah.
And it's odd because I find myself, you know, in the climate we're in politically and in so many ways, everything is binary. There's sort of, you know, social media, politics, everything is binary. And actually going through the process of writing this book and thinking about these things is kind of when I start getting really het up, which is impossible not to these days. You have to kind of reject them. But and I didn't want to say, oh, this is a cathartic book or there's all this resolution in it. I wanted it to be ambiguous because I think, you know, it says at the end, we are never out of the woods. That's the whole point. But I have, you know, a good relationship with the forest now, I feel. I'm looking forward to getting up there and, you know, I think it's going to be a beautiful autumn. The promise is good. Scotland's a bit further ahead always than London, so your leaves up here are giving me a good indication of what we've got to come down south.
Yeah,
so.
It's looking absolutely gorgeous, I have to say, right now in Glasgow. There's a tree outside my window, and right now it's like a traffic light. It's got red, green and amber on it, and I love looking at it changing every day. Thank you so much, Luke. Now, do you know what timmerbreeks are, or the North Dancers, and what's a shoggle? The answers are all in the first ever Scots Dictionary of Nature. Our next guest is a visual artist who lives and works in Glasgow and Strathspey. She creates prints, photographs, video and sound, and this is her first book. Her work is all about landscape, nature and how we locate ourselves in the world, so maybe it can help us lose ourselves too. Joining me on the sofa, it's Amanda Thomson. It's very nice to see you. Thank you for joining me. Winkling you out of your Strathspey hideaway to come and be on the show today. Will you read us a wee bit from the start of the dictionary so we can get a context for it?
Absolutely. In a second-hand bookshop in Edinburgh, I found an old dictionary of the Scottish language, compiled by John Jemison, abridged by John Johnson, and published in 1846. In opening random pages, I'd come across words such as timber breeks, timber trousers, meaning a coffin, and deedchack, the sound made by a woodworm in houses, so called from its clicking noise and supposed to be a premonition of death. I loved these words and more. They had a resonance and a particular feeling to them that was sometimes poignant and affecting, and sometimes conveyed a prosaic descriptiveness that nonetheless spoke of close connections and an attentiveness to the nuances of the landscape, what it contains, how we move through it, and even specific times of day or year. Breakback, the harvest moon, so called by the harvest labourers because of the additional work it entails. There were also words like huam, the moan of an owl in the warm days of summer, evocative of that feeling of the haziness of a long, hot summer's day as it spills into evening. This old dictionary made me begin to wonder about lost connections to land and place, and perhaps even ways of seeing and being in the world, and I began wondering what else I might find.
So that was the start of the journey that led you to doing this book. So you used a couple of other dictionaries as well, didn't you? Yes,
I used what's now the Chambers Dictionary of the Scots Language, Scots Dialect Dictionary, and another dictionary which was produced in kind of later on in the 19th century, which was a kind of an addition to the Jemison Dictionary. So the three dictionaries in all, Warwick's, Jemison's and Johnson's. To create this new dictionary. Yes. I have to say, it was such a childish pleasure for me to read a whole dictionary from start to finish. I haven't done it since I was a kid, and I loved learning all the new words. And I've been trying to find ways to just casually drop them into conversation the whole time. One of my other favourites is Langhaim, which is grave, which I really liked. I liked lots of the words for birds, and I was astonished to learn that there were 18 words for yellowhammer. You don't put them all in there, very long. But you know, why did we need so many words for one bird? Well, I think you have to, I suppose when you're thinking back to the 19th century when these dictionaries were produced, we were a lot more localised. And also, I think with changing agricultural practices, there are not as many yellowhammers as there used to be, so they're not as common as well. So there's something about a lot of the words that are there and the different variations just speak to the fact that there's a lot of these different birds in these different parts of Scotland in a way that there aren't anymore.
There is a whole section in the book on birds, and I wondered if you could talk about why it is that birds are so important to you, because they also appear in the Antlers of Water collection that we're going to be talking about in a bit.
Do you know, I've been a bird watcher since I was a teenager. It's something that I've done all my life. I still feel like I'm a novice, but birds kind of follow me wherever I go. So every spring in Sucky Hall Street, when I'm walking up to the art school, I always see goldfinches, and you know, just across the road in the railway station, they follow us kind of all over the place, and no matter where they are. So I think the birds became an important part of the book because I can't help but be in a place and notice the birds.
But that's about you, I think, because I think the birds must be there for everybody, but you're seeing them. How have you managed to bring that attention for them? How do you create the space to see them?
I think it's just something that you do. I think, you know, I think it'll be interesting to hear Kathleen speaking about her books, because a lot of the stuff that I think a lot of us are interested in is how we come to notice things, and what are the things that make a place what it is. So I think you can always tell, I think for a lot of people, without really thinking about it, they'll start to notice swallows and know that summer's coming, or, you know, we've probably all been starting to see skeins of geese come across, which mark kind of another turn of the year. You know, there's things like robins over the winter and Christmas. You know, there's certain birds that people will notice and come to see the significance of.
I'm just going to ask you, what are the first birds you can remember, Heather?
Remember seeing ever?
Yeah. When you learned the word bird, what was it in your head? What was the bird you saw?
When I learnt the word bird. You know what the really funny thing is, Damian? The moment you said, what are the first birds you remember seeing, I thought of monkeys. Because I remember in Hong Kong going on a walk with my family when I was really small, and the one thing we were paranoid about coming from the trees were not birds, they were monkeys.
Incredible.
So there you go, left field, not a bird.
The monkey. Kathleen?
Now you're asking, I think it might have been the ducks in the park.
Ducks in the park?
Yeah.
When you were taken to feed them bread when you were little. Luke?
It would have been the tits pecking the foil from milk and drinking the cream off the top, which now makes me feel ancient, but that's what used to happen.
Yes, that's true. Yes.
For me, it was starlings, but because we had loads of them on the washing line outside our house, but actually also now it's canaries, because my next door neighbours, when I was a kid, bred canaries, and I remember the noise of them and the dust from them as well. They have a lovely kind of goldy dust that comes off them, and I remember them so clearly.
Like for me, I remember my papa pointing out house sparrows in the garden, and he would call them spjugs.
Spjugs, yeah, spjugs,
Yeah,
spuggies.
and do you have spjugs?
Spjugs.
Yeah, as well. And that was a word that I hadn't heard or thought about for years till I started going through these Scots dictionaries.
What were the other words that came back to you that you remembered?
Well, things like we used to go for donners.
A donner.
Go for a donner.
I'm just going to ask, look, what's a donner? Do you know what it is?
Now you persecute me for being English there.
Are you going to say kebab?
Yes.
It's a wee walk, right? A pointless walk, though. Like a walk without an aim.
Yeah.
I feel like it's got a particular quality of
That's
a walk.
right, yeah.
A wee donner.
Yeah. But we used to go for donners of a Sunday. And stravaigues, of course.
What's a stravaig?
A stravaig is also a kind of a walk and a wander, but kind of interest. Like there's a good pub in Glasgow called Stravaigin,
Right.
which is to walk and to wander. But there's something interesting in the Old Scots dictionaries how a stravaiger was somebody who wandered but actually had lost their religion as well. So there's kind of interesting kind of nuances.
So they're sort of
between words
faithless, directionless in a way.
Yeah, then, though,
Yeah.
I don't think we use that. We don't have that kind of connotation to the word now. So
the word's changed over time. It's not so much a word to do with nature, unless you were going through a safari park, but a birl, which is another word that I like, that's like a donor. A birl, going for a birl in the car. Yeah.
Or like a run.
Yeah, like a run. Yeah,
a run in the
exactly,
car,
like a run. Yeah, no, there were so many words in the book that were new to me. I was struck by the number of words that were to do with weather.
Yes.
Lots of words to do with weather. I wonder if you could give us some of the words.
Well, I was going to... I came across, I think, 62 different words for rain.
And that's just in Glasgow. That's just in Glasgow.
And I won't go through 62, but I'll give you a few of them just now. Sapless, rainless and dry, Lunky, sultry, the oppressive state of the atmosphere before rain or thunder. Heavy-hearted, which I think is a lovely word, means lowering and threatening rain. A stew, a rain so thin it resembles a vapour. A smear, a smoosh, a light drizzling rain.
I like a smear.
Like a smear. A scrow, a dissel, slight showers of rain. Scouthery, abounding with flying showers. A blash, a plash, a slouge, a plipe, a leash, a rash, a downding, an even down, a helm of wheat, a tomb of rain, a trash of wheat, are heavy falls of rain. And spluttery means very rainy.
Spluttery. There's been a kind of a trend recently. There was the lovely Lost Words book to do with words that we have used to describe the natural world or animals, which have been lost. And I wondered if you could talk about the words and the world and the relationship between the two of them.
So there's a lot of kind of things that are lost and words that are lost because we don't need them anymore. But I think there's a lot of words that are lost because we don't necessarily have these connections to nature in a way that we once did. But I think a lot of the things that become interesting is that what happens when you start to notice again. And sometimes the words can enable noticing. It's like I never go out in the woods on a windy day now without thinking of the trees as flouncing.
I love the idea of flouncing
You know,
trees.
because the flouncing is the word that once was used for how trees blew in a gale. Do you know? I think of days, windy days as gloustery days now. Do you know, there's just these lovely ways of describing. And I think if you can find words to describe, you tend to notice. And if you start to notice, you can start to care. And a lot of the kind of impetus behind the book, and I suppose generally the work I make or what I write, is about how you notice and how you start to care about things.
Yes, because you can't care about something that you haven't noticed.
Yeah.
Now, like Luke, you have a strong affinity for and attraction to the woods, and I know that you wrote about, I think you wrote about Caledonia for your PhD thesis. And it's something that I read about occasionally in guidebooks and sort of say to myself, one summer or one autumn, I'm going to go and try and find a bit of ancient Caledonia. Is there a place where you can go and see a bit of it? Yeah,
oh, absolutely. I mean, there's places like Glen Affric and Abernethy Forests. It's just where I stay. Is Abernethy Forest is kind of the last remnant Scots pine forest in Scotland, and there's a lovely book written in the late 1950s by Stevens and Carlyle, and they have this lovely phrase which is, to stand in it is to feel the past. You know, there's certainly parts of Scotland and parts of the forest in Scotland that have been there since for centuries.
Do you think there's a danger in that it makes us think, well, it's always been there, so it always will be?
I hope not, because I think we're so aware of how precarious everything is now, even to the extent of I would never have thought I wouldn't have been able to get to the forest or get to the islands in a way that COVID's kind of happened this year. Do you know, there's so many things that we perhaps have taken for granted that hopefully will not take as much for granted kind of as we go into the future.
I've had this conversation with a few people now that COVID has been not quite a dress rehearsal, but it's been the first thing that's happened in many people's lives that's been completely out of their control, and they've had to adapt and they've had to change, and they've seen the world change in ways that they couldn't imagine. And I have heard people talk about how in some ways this is perhaps not a warm-up but a warning about reaching the point of irreversible climate change. Do you think there's something in that?
I think the minute we start to think it's irreversible is the minute we stop doing things. So I think we've always got to think that there's hope for change. And sometimes that change comes from noticing. You know, it comes from noticing that there aren't the Orlands, there aren't the Yellowhammers that there used to be, or swallow numbers are down, or the seabird colonies are depleting because there's something kind of awry in the ocean temperatures and things like that. Do you know, there's something about how we notice and be aware that there are things we can do to alleviate, stop change.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me,
welcome.
Amanda.
Thank you.
My final guest is one of our greatest poets and writers, the author of Findings and Surfacing. So she was the perfect person to edit Antlers of Water, the very first collection of new Scottish nature writing. She writes, "The natural world is not a painted backdrop to our human concern. It is our human concern." I am, of course, talking about Kathleen Jamie, but just before she joins me, I braved a very autumnal Edinburgh to meet the Grassmarket Open Book Group. So I'm here in Edinburgh, which is home to Rebus, the train spotting gang, and a certain Miss Jean Brodie. But it's not them I'm here to meet. I'm here to talk books with the folk from Grassmarket Open Book Group. And now I'm going to go meet Jess, their facilitator. Hi, Jess.
Hiya.
How are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I'm very good, thanks for braving the weather.
You're welcome.
So tell me about the Grassmarket Open Book Group.
The idea behind the group is that, you know, we're providing a kind of more accessible form of book group where there's no homework, so no one has to read in advance. We're actually positively discouraged from reading in advance or from knowing what we're reading.
I definitely think that for some people there's a bit of guilt involved in their book group. You know, I haven't finished the whole book, or, you know, I haven't got to it, I haven't even started it sometimes. And I think I definitely hear from meeting book groups that puts some people off.
I mean, that's the other thing that's so important about what we do at Open Book is that we read everything aloud together in the group, and we usually go round the circle, and there's no pressure to read. If you don't want to read aloud, you don't have to. You can just sit and listen and enjoy the reading. But most of the members of this group really love to read, and they love to have their turn in reading.
The group are going to be reading from Antlers of Water, a collection of Scottish nature writing edited by Kathleen Jamie. And the piece they've selected is Amanda Thomson's Around Some Islands.
Ian, he's going to be joining us for our group today.
Thanks for having me.
Hello. Should we kick off? Lawrence, do you want to start with the first paragraph?
This was an unhurried traversal, hours and hours of watching and looking. Fleckit skies, no phones, no internet. Sheer waters skim the waves in black to white to black lines.
On Canna, there's a Celtic cross from around the 8th century, which is broken. So I was told, because it was used for target practice during the Napoleonic Wars. Sailing around Canna towards Mingulay, someone pointed back and spoke of a cave on the west side where the island's boys hid when the press gangs visited.
The rabbits not only affected agriculture on the island, but their burrowing threatened to destroy the archaeological remnants of humans.
The Song of the Whale dropped anchor off the eastern side of the island in the sheltered curve of the bay. From its deck, we looked out onto a sandy beach, a deserted village, and the land rising beyond to a smoothly curved skyline.
Since 1912, when the last inhabitant finally left the island, no one and nothing has stemmed the wear of the weather or the creep of the sand.
Right, what did everybody else think about this essay? Did you enjoy it? Did you have any kind of thoughts or questions that came to your mind when you were reading? Did you relate to it?
It was great when these places were mentioned. I know them, you know, I know the islands, I know Canna and I know Egg. I've been on Egg, and last year I was out at the Western Isles, which Mingulay's a part of, and it was just beautifully written, you know, and I was so glad actually. We had a great piece to read.
Makes you be there, if that makes any sense. You get transported. The descriptions are quite accurate, and you could almost sort of like smell the peat and, you know, see the waves and how the weather is changing perhaps, and it becomes the whole atmosphere. Yeah, you kind of get immersed into it. I like reads like this.
Yeah,
I really do.
I would never have thought of reading some of the books that we have read, and so for me it's expanded my my reading, and I read a lot more books now personally out with the group than I did before I joined.
Yeah, I did as much for the contact at the beginning, but now I've realised that that I have got something to bring to discussions about literature and that, and I'm really looking forward to reading the rest of this book, actually, you know. I never would have done that. It's so far out of my comfort zone, but it ain't anymore.
Big confession, I don't actually like audiobooks, but I did love hearing those people reading aloud. There's something magical about stopping and sitting down and listening to a story. And you don't need to join a book group to do it. You can do it at home tonight. They loved the collection, so they said, we're going to finish this one. What higher praise can you get as a writer? And will you read us a wee bit from the collection that you've edited?
I wrote the introduction to this, and the bulk of the book is by 20 other writers. So this is my contribution, a little piece from the introduction. The idea lingers of Scotland as a place of lochs and bens and faraway islands, a wild and romantic place where one may forget her human travails. Even if that was once true, it's not now. There can be no one who has not heard of climate change, which we now see rapidly changing the world around us. No one unaware of the mounting levels of threat facing wildlife through habitat loss and want of food. No one can be unaware of ocean plastic and chemical pollution. Our writers are fully cognizant of environmental crisis. They don't pretend it's not happening, but they are not prophets of doom. 21 writers and 2 visual artists were asked to contribute to this book. All responded at once with great enthusiasm. All responded, I believe, out of love of the world and our particular part of it. They're not offering escapism. They know it's not possible nowadays to escape into nature and find temporary relief from some other real world. Far from it. The natural world, the world which birthed us and sustains us, is where the biggest and most frightening changes are happening. What the writers in this volume are doing, in their very different ways, is meeting the challenge of finding a way of speaking and writing, witnessing and celebrating as they continue to love the world, its landforms and plants and creatures, even as we navigate a crisis. The natural world is not here as a painted backdrop to our human concern. It is our human concern.
So I think when people think about nature writing, they often think of fey, uninhabited worlds. But here you give us a collection of essays which very often have people in them. Were you struck by that when you got the pieces in? How populated they are?
No, because I think that this book is the latest in a great resurgence of nature writing and environmental writing, and I think that has been part of the resurgence, democratising, populating, and a bringing of human culture into. I can't abide the phrase nature writing. I'm going to have to use it into nature writing.
Why do you not like it? Why can't you abide the phrase?
For the reasons you've just said, you know, that it did go out. It kind of vanished in the 1960s, and it went out. Exactly that, a silence, a fairness, a lone figure, you know, striding across the landscape. Then there was a kind of silence for 40 years as we came to terms with our environmental crisis. And the reawakening of nature writing has come back different. And it has come back with lots of different voices, often speaking in the first person, you know, which I admit can be cacophonous sometimes, but you know, why not? You know, everybody can speak out of their own consciousness and their own experience. So.
The pieces in the book, one of them is by Amanda, which I very much enjoyed, where you go off to, now I'm going to say this, is it Mingulay or Mingulay? How are you supposed to say it? It's terrible, I'm so alienated from my own country. Mingulay? Mingulay. And that's the Seabird Island. Tell us a wee bit about the piece that you wrote for the collection.
Well, it came about after I was on a Cape Farewell kind of boat, which is Cape Farewell is a charity which kind of tries to pull together different people who are interested in climate change, but just to travel and to talk and to learn. And what was incredible about the journey was just that slow unfolding of time to this island, and what I was talking about earlier, just that time to see, time to look, time to listen, time to think. And it's interesting how some things you do stick with you and stick with you for years. And that day on that island is something I'll just never forget. And that's what I wanted to write about when Kathleen asked me to contribute to the book, because it was just one of these things that you just kind of hold kind of very, very close to you.
you describe it, or it is described as new Scottish nature writing. Now, having just said you abhorred the term nature writing, but we'll work with it for a wee minute.
Let's do that.
What's particularly new about it, and what's particularly Scottish about it?
Well, that's what I wanted to discover. As I say, there's been this resurgence of nature writing for 15 years, 20 years, and it became apparent that Scotland featured as a country quite often, as landscapes. You know, people would come to Scotland, tell us how wonderful our landscapes were, and go away. And I thought, no, this is not on, because what they're often describing was not our lived experience as Scots. You know, we're in the middle of the Central Belt. Nobody was writing about the Central Belt, you know. And I thought, I knew there was several practitioners. I just knew that, you know. And I thought, what if I got these people together? Could we discover if there was indeed a Scottish nature writing, in the same way that there's a Scottish crime writing, you know, which I'm quite jealous of. They've got an identity, they've got a thing. And I thought, we could do that. There are enough of us. We've got enough excellent writers. We've got this diversity of opinion. But nobody's ever just brought them together. So it was the work of a moment to draw up a list of writers that one could include, you know. And it was very timely, I think. I'm very pleased with this book. Whether there is actually a Scottish nature writing, well, I'll leave that to the reader. But we have people from, you know, city centres and people on islands and everything in between. I'm very pleased with the geographic spread of it as well.
Tell me about the word solastalgia, because I hadn't encountered it until I read it in this collection. Is it in your book as well? I'm not sure if it is in your book, solastalgia, but tell me about solastalgia.
I hadn't encountered it either until Malachi Talek produced this piece.
He describes it as the lived experience of negatively perceived environmental change. So the sense that, you know, you were saying earlier, Amanda, oh, the geese are flying, you know, it would be the feeling of the geese are not flying, or Heather, if you go out for the walk and the monkeys don't jump out the tree, it's like, oh, it's a feeling of, I suppose it's sort of like a kind of angsty nostalgia.
Yeah, I suppose so.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, a feeling.
Yeah. And I know once you have it articulated, you know what it means.
Yeah.
But how do we live with that is the question. I don't know if we can live with that. You know, if every time we see a bird, we think, oh, but there are fewer than there used to be, or if you have a hot day, it's hotter than it ought to be. You know, it's crippling. You know, and it may be the case that we have to be frightened into a change, but we also have to love our way into change, I think. And many of the pieces in this book are doing that, articulating a way of still loving the world while we endeavour through human culture, because I can't tell them apart. I can't tell human culture apart from nature, you know, especially now as we are, as a species, governing the natural world, you know. How, as a human species, as human cultures, do we navigate this? And I find that a really exciting place to be. I don't find it exciting to be a lone figure in the wilderness. You know, I do find it exciting to be at that very point where human culture and the natural world meet, you know, for good or ill. But that's where we are in historical terms, you know, as never before. And we never before knew that. You know, it's a really exciting moment.
It's interesting hearing you say that in terms of that binary, which is exactly what Luke talks about in his book. It's saying that, you know, there isn't, if we try and just lose the idea that there's a distinction between the human and the natural world, and we accept that humans have changed the natural world already far beyond anything that it could have been, and that we've been doing it for a very long time, then let's think about where does that leave us and where might we go from here?
Just so, accepting it is a big one. I think it's the first time in human history, in our huge, long evolutionary history, we've had to accept that we have and can dominate the natural world. So we have to, and very quickly, in a matter of a few decades, get our heads around that. And that's where we're at. We're just coming out of that shock, I think.
Yes.
You know, and then thinking, OK, this is where we are. In the space of only 50 years, perhaps, you know, a huge evolutionary leap. I think, well, our problem, now we can start to move our way through it.
I love the chapter, the essay about the wind turbines.
Christopher Wicky's.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a really great piece because I think that people get really het up about wind turbines. And I look at them, I live in Brighton, and I look out. It's funny, I wrote a short story 15 years ago about a wind farm off the shore of Brighton, and now it's come true. So I'm just thinking about what else I wrote in that story and what else I can manifest. But I love looking out to the wind farm because to me it feels optimistic.
Okay.
I look at the wind farm and I feel like, oh, we're doing something that's sensible. And I think they can also be quite graceful. But I know that a lot of people think they're a pure abomination and they hate them and they think, oh, they kill the birds and everything else. But this piece was great because it says, you know, the animals have adapted. The birds aren't suicidal. They aren't flying at the wind turbines. And, you know, and they're in the landscape and they're part of the landscape. And can we all just get over it? And I thought, brilliant. It was really good.
Good.
Who wrote that piece?
Chris Powicki.
Yeah.
A good writer and a poet who lives in Dunblane.
Yeah, no, I thought it was a really good piece. And it made me think about windmills because, you know, windmills used to be everywhere.
Oh, I see.
There used to be lots and lots of windmills around, and they've all gone. And I sort of think, well, the wind turbines aren't forever.
No, that's the interesting thing. Nothing is forever.
We can get rid of them.
Yeah. This is a mining area. I must have thought the mines were forever at some point. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, and one of the things the collection does, and actually more so in surfacing, is give us a sense of time. And I think there's a great urgency to the debate around climate change that sometimes, to me, makes me feel a bit panicked, a bit hysterical, like, oh, I can't, it's all too much, it's all too now. Yeah. Whereas when I think in terms of longer time, I feel more durable and more able to respond somehow.
Yes, it is a wonderful gift to be able to look back in time and then use that to bring yourself forward in time as well. And just think the long game. But then again, we haven't got the long game around climate change and species depletion. We haven't got terribly long to make that change. But then again, we are thinking about it, as you say, we are doing it in a cat-handed sort of way.
Yeah, we're trying.
Imagine if we didn't know and we did nothing.
Kathleen, I've got a question for you from the book group that I went to meet with on the very blustery day. It's a question from Isola, who was in the group, and she said, how did you go about choosing the people to invite for the collection?
Well, I just got the back of an envelope and I wrote down the first 20 names that I thought of, actually 20, a few more than that, and thought, no, the book has got to end at some point. And I wanted to honour the people who are not young, but who have been doing away at the nature and environment writing before it became a thing, you know. So I didn't want to exclude them, one or two of the older generation. I wanted to try and get this geographic spread, you know. And as I say, it was a work of a very few minutes. There could have been more. And I hope in a few years there might be a volume 2 and then the younger ones can come through. But, so I wanted the poets, the experimental pieces, there's no fiction in it. It's all non-fiction, but a spread of different forms of writing. So it's been the best job ever. It was a lovely project. It's so easy.
I want to talk about surfacing your collection, which I absolutely devoured and enjoyed a great deal, and again was very surprised by. You know, there's a book with what's on the jacket. I think there's
these are tools and implements.
There are implements
and some leaves and feathers and things, but these are tools from Yupik culture. I think this is a fish hook. Yes, I'm a fish hooks, and this is a knife, a woman's knife.
There's no people on there, but the book is full. Again, it's a book full, teeming of people, and I think this tells you what my preconceptions were about it going in. But I absolutely love that you take us to that place and to meet those people. I wonder if you can tell us a wee bit about, or read a wee bit for us from that.
I'll read you a wee piece from the very, very, very start of the book, which I think, ironically, has no people in it whatsoever. Just myself, sitting at the mouth of a cave, the reindeer cave in Assynt. You're sheltering in a cave, thinking about the Ice Age. From the cave mouth, a West Highland landscape in spring in the early Anthropocene. On the hillside opposite, 6 red deer have bedded down in the heather. It's raining, a soft Highland rain, a smur. Not half an hour ago, you were walking beside the burn in a narrow ravine further up the glen. You heard something, glanced up to see a large rock bounce, then plummet into the burn 25 yards in front of you. The echo faded, but your heart was still hammering as you backed away. They call these caves the bone caves because of all the animal bones found buried inside. Animals long extinct in this country. You're in Reindeer Cave, where antlers rather than bones were discovered. An excavation in the 1920s produced hundreds of reindeer antler, almost all from females. You sit at the cave mouth, looking out at the rain, thinking about the Ice Age. You realise you haven't a clue. We can wait, say the hills. Take your time. The ice came and went, is that right? Ice covered the land and froze the sea for thousands of years. But now and again, every 100,000 years or so, came a milder spell when the ice retreated, tundra formed on the land and reindeer wandered in. Glaciers in the glens, or what became the glens. You reached the caves, you climbed a grassy slope 150 feet above the river. You try to imagine stepping from the cave mouth onto ice and moraine. Some years ago, cave divers entered into the same hill by an entrance higher on the moor, by the back door, so to speak, intending to explore a system below the bone caves. It makes you quail, the thought of crawling through darkness and passageways and underground streams, echoes and falling rocks. Deep within, the cavers found the bones of a bear. What was that like? Like reaching the memory of the hill itself. Eventually, carefully, the bones were brought to the surface. In time, they were carbon dated. They were 45,000 years old. A long sleep, even for a bear. 16 million days and nights had passed in the upper world. Long enough for the ice to return, then yield again, then return in one last snap, then leave for good, or at least for now.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
What links the pieces in the collection for you?
The title, The Surfacing, was one we came up with because the pieces are pretty disparate, but through them all there's an idea of surfacing physically, as in archaeological remains coming to the surface, and emotionally and mentally, as in memory. So it is, in very different ways, things coming to the surface.
And when I was reading about you going to visit digs in a couple of different parts of the world, I was so jealous because I really just wanted to go there and have this sense of pulling something out of the ground or finding something in the ground that nobody else had touched for hundreds or thousands of years. And I wonder if you can tell us what that felt like.
Well, when I was a youngster, I wanted to be an archaeologist, but my life took a different turn. But I've been able to return to it in my writing quite often. And I've always loved the sense of the past being in the present, that we are here in the present, but still surrounded by the past, sometimes even the deep past. You know, I love standing stones and chambered cairns and that kind of thing. I used to cycle off as a teenager to find them. And so it's not so much that the human hand has touched them, but it's, as we said before, the sense of deep time, time and change, great obsessions. And we're living in a moment of change. And as we've said, we're finding a way of navigating through that into the deep future. It's just, I find that thrilling.
I noticed recently on Twitter that you said that you'd left academia. So what are you going to be doing with your time now that you're not on campus?
I will be trying to find my way back into my own poetry. And when I was 15, I wanted to be a writer. And now I'm looking at 60 and I'm going to be a writer.
Oh, come on. You've won all the major poetry prizes.
I still want to do it. It's still the best thing.
Okay, but we are clear that you are a writer. Can we just, we can always be better.
Yes, I want to do that.
You will always want to be better. But it's so interesting, that idea that you say, I want to be a writer.
I still do.
I still want to be a writer. Thank you,
My
Kathleen.
pleasure.
Now, tonight's poet grew up between Orkney, Hong Kong and Bedfordshire. Her acclaimed work is inspired by Scotland's native woodlands. Heather, tell us a wee bit about the poem you're going to give us.
This poem, well, it's not necessarily indigenously Scottish, this one. Daphne, it's about the plants, both sorts, the deciduous and the otherwise. We usually hear about the otherwise. And about the myth and about the poem.
Take it away.
Daphne. The skin, the organ visible, the heart, the liar. Parts of the body peel off, subject to environmental conditions. A chord thrums. If I were to inscribe a name in living bark, what percentage risk that the tree become hidebound? Of course, Traditore, trees have bark, not hide or skin. But have you never been shocked by the peeling, the nakedness, the danger of figurative language? Did you not know the bark can resist as well as foster growth? In animals, it is impossible to pinch away the skeletal structure from the hide, or the other way around, subject to environmental conditions. There comes a moment when, self-conscious with pointing, you began to touch. Parts of the subject peel off. Such constraint and what comes with it, a pause in radial growth foil to the possibilities of sapwood, remarkable only in cross-section, in which internal death of heartwood may be noted, or fall off. Elsewhere, it may be possible to consider the fruit, drupaceous, or a deciduousness marked by pink sepals. Deciduousness was not part of the legend, but there it is. There are also no true petals, but daphnin, fruit, mezarin, sap, which are in both cases reaction, poison. The skin, the organ visible, a quickening. The style, the liar, short or wholly absent.
That's it for tonight. So thank you to the Grassmarket Open Book Group and to my guests, Heather H. Young, Luke Turner, Amanda Thomson and Kathleen Jamie. Until next time, happy reading.